I want to take a more broader look at the politics of climate change domestically over the last year or so, and it's taken some fascinating turns in recent months. The Prime Minister has been flat-footed, like the man on the beach with the tsunami on the horizon, while he's overseen, I believe, a deplorable downscaling of commitment to alternative energy and renewable energy targets, except in relation to fossil fuel. Indeed, it's been more than downscaling, it amounts to silencing of alternative energy proponents. In the Canberra Times of Thursday, 4th of January, environment writer Rosalind Beattie reports, here in Australia we've seen intimidation, exclusion from influence, political ridicule and censorship of scientists, she says. We've also seen a dumbing down of the political debate on climate change as a result, with rhetoric rather than science the weapon of choice adopted by government and opposition. In May last year, the Canberra Times obtained a confidential report by the Cooperative Research Centre for Coal in Sustainable Development. This says that solar thermal technology is capable of producing Australia's entire electricity demand and is the only renewable energy capable of making deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. Now remember for the moment that John Howard's claim that coal and nuclear are the only energies capable of meeting our baseload requirements. The report, written by 5 CSIRO energy technology scientists, said solar thermal technology was, quote, poised to play a significant role in baseload generation in Australia and would be cost competitive with coal in 5 to 7 years. The Australian Greenhouse Office's own website says enormous potential exists to use the energy of the sun directly for a range of applications based on electricity generation using solar thermal collectors and steam turbines. Now you may have seen Paul Sheehan article in the Sydney Morning Herald yesterday telling how Australian company Solar Heat and Power has been forced to take its technology to the US, where investors are lining up to develop their solar thermal technology as a probable replacement for coal, nuclear and oil. Why is he heading offshore? Because the Australian government is simply not interested in any energy source that doesn't exploit our mineral resources, namely coal and uranium, however more efficient and clean solar thermal power might be. Sheehan says Howard has been in office 11 years and his response to our greatest ever environment threat is incremental, piecemeal, reactive and belated, and one might add totally tied along with the Labor states and federal opposition to the fossil fuel industry. Prior to its publication in the Canberra Times, the Cooperative Research Centre report was, according to the paper, passed around like a hot potato. The government claims that the Centre just hadn't got round to releasing it. Several scientists said it was deliberately suppressed. One can imagine that anything not coal or uranium friendly would receive short shrift from this government and indeed many of the state governments. Another report from the CSIRO on geosequestration is apparently so damning of the technology, all copies have been reportedly destroyed. Referring to the Four Corners program, Lowe outlines how Professor Graham Pearman, eminent climate change scientist, was effectively barred from commenting on which responses would be best to counter global warming. In other words, outline the problem but don't dare comment on government policy, especially those related to recommended emission reduction targets. The government, of course, has failed to renew even a 2% renewable target, strangling any serious development of alternatives such as wind power and solar, while energy conservation is regarded as political poison. Professor Lowe is unequivocal. Government is using CSIRO management to gag climate scientists. Quoting Guy Pearce, a former senior coalition staffer, Hamilton reveals how climate change policy in Canberra has for years been driven by a small group of ex-bureaucrats, now lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry, who describe themselves as the greenhouse mafia. They represent the coal, oil, cement, aluminium, mining and electricity industries. This greenhouse mafia admits to helping write ministerial briefs and cabinet submissions, and also claims to be more au fait with greenhouse policy than the government, because they're the ones who know it. According to Pearce, they're absolutely committed to defeating the environmentalists on climate change. whoever environmentalists and greenies are these days. Does it include David Mills, the CEO of Solar Heat and Power, who flies out to the US on Thursday? Clive Hamilton's speech to the Climate Change Conference in Adelaide last February details behind-the-scenes manoeuvring over climate change to try and make the government's position more popular. He quotes a leaked note from a meeting between John Howard, Minister Ian Macfarlane and his Lower Emission Advisory Group of major fossil fuel companies. Besides noting how the PM reckoned the Sydney Morning Herald was creating a problem for the government over climate change policy, to which he'll now add the Canberra Times, no doubt, and include Sheehan's solar article from yesterday as well, the PM was also worried a report on the mandatory renewable energy target by a committee chaired by Senator Grant Tambley, one of his own, had actually recommended extending the scheme, extending it. Minister Macfarlane, much to the horror no doubt of all of the meeting, observed the MREC review had found the scheme worked too well and investment in renewables was running ahead of the original planning. The MREC, of course, was not extended, and much of the alternative energy impetus built up on the back of a slim 2% renewable target has all but dried up, as clean coal and nuclear are promoted by government with the help of key sections of the media. Whatever you think of Kello's views, there's a great irony that global warming and climate politics has given new life to both the renewable alternative energy sector, but crucially to nuclear. In a growing anxiety, almost panic, lots of fibs are being told about nuclear, especially by politicians. Nuclear, clean coal and alternative energies are being spoken of in the same clean green breath as is desalination. The fact is the global warming debate has had by far the largest stimulus on the nuclear industry. There are big expansion plans all over the world. George Bush has convinced Howard to take the nuclear route and no doubt store the American waste it hasn't been able to store under Yucca Mountain. Climate change is a godsend to proponents of an industry that hides its carbon-dirty manufacturing and enrichment sector, its 200 contaminating isotopes including plutonium, radium, iodine and strontium emissions, an industry that cannot get rid of its hugely dangerous waste unless, of course, Australia decides to bury it for them. The fact is, courtesy of climate change politics and fear, nuclear expansion now dwarfs the renewable market, even where the latter is encouraged and growing around the globe. In Australia, governments realise we'd be in deep recession were it not for our minerals. The answer? Paint the minerals green and clean and stay away from Kyoto. At a local level, any questioning of coal mining might seem politically insane. For me, particularly perhaps in the Western coalfields, as it might be in the Hunter, but what the hell, I don't care. You have to say it, and you have to take on those who would argue otherwise, such as the extended problem. Tough questions need to be asked about genuine alternatives to fossil fuels and a tax on carbon, and other methods should be examined to be part of that equation, to equalise the opportunities for competitive clean energy. But are the major parties talking tax or meaningful renewable targets? Of course not. The major party politics of climate change in Australia is about short-term fixes, blaming your opponents, giving token support to clean energy alternatives and making absolutely sure you look after your mates in the fossil fuel industry and the unions. Thank you.